So our vision. So as you can see on top, we have Zenko, the Fox, which is our new product, the Ring, which is on-prem enterprise storage for petabyte scale, and you see the public cloud as well. So Azure, S3, Amazon, and Google. Right? So we see that the enterprise wants to use multiple clouds, not just one. And you see that as a theme in our presentation today. We talk a lot about how to use the best cloud for your need. So we believe in multi-cloud, and our customers tell us that, hey, I have a lot of data on Scality. It makes sense to send some of that data outside. It could be for archiving purpose because it's cheaper to keep very old data in the cloud that you never read. Or it could be because they want to burst and use the cloud for compute. That could be for transcoding reasons. That could be for security, hashing data, doing checksums. There's a lot of use for multi-cloud. Via AWS API, the S3 API is the one that most people use. So we continue to invest on it. At the last Cloud Field Days last year, we talked about our new S3 API. We implemented it to support more of the very interesting calls about security and user management that are arriving in the S3 API. We continue to believe that it's the de facto standard. We also think legacy applications are here to stay. So you see that when we talk object, we always have a file system approach as well, so that you can continue to use your existing application. And we also believe that over time, it's not something that happens overnight, but more and more of the infrastructure software becomes open source. And that's why we actually invested in open source. And we talk about how that paid off in a few slides. So the recap from last year, right around the time of Cloud Field Days, we released a new version of our Ring on-prem storage, Ring 6. Then we had our open source S3 server at the same time. Today we are more than 700,000 downloads, so 700,000 downloads. So that's actually, to give you an idea, we had a provision. Our goal was 5,000 downloads at the end of 2016, and we got more than 300,000. So it was exceeding our goals. In June, we released Ring 7, which has a lot of capability in terms of versioning, geo-replication, replication between clouds, and we get a demo of that coming soon. And we launched Zenko a few weeks ago, which is our new open source product. It builds on the S3 server and adds a lot of hybrid capabilities. So something that we did last year is trying to build a community around our product. So we've done a lot of meetups, a lot of hackathons. We participated in a lot of community events. That's how we got our downloads. It's meeting people in the field that pushes people to use our product. So we'll continue to do that. I wanted to just talk about our next hackathon. That's in School 42, Silicon Valley. So I don't know if you heard of it. It's a software engineering school that's completely tuition-free, so nobody has to pay for it. And it's based on a peer learning model. And so we're going to host a hackathon to build extension for Zenko. So you will see in the upcoming slide what the extension are going to look like. And so we're having students play with Zenko. So we're looking forward to it. If you want to talk about it, share the link. This is going to be a great community event. Next is POR for S3 for the enterprise.
Okay. All right. Hello, everybody, and thanks. So as Giorgio said, we certainly think that the S3 API from Amazon is a huge influence on the world of storage. So I'm going to focus this talk really about S3, the product that we have in our flagship object store called the Ring. I'm going to collaborate with Rahul, and we're going to show you a demo at the end of some of the new asynchronous replication capabilities. So I think this will provide a nice kind of baseline overview of the current product, and that'll allow us to set the stage for when we talk about Zenko as the next one. So as Giorgio said, we did Ring 6 about a year ago. As part of that release, we introduced a brand new S3 interface. So we call that the S3 connector. The reason I say brand new is because 6 years ago or so, there was actually another incarnation of an S3 connector that the company did. That was the one we called RS2. That was really kind of in the time that we were all looking for which API was going to win the wars for object storage, right? We had OpenStack Swift as a contender. We had a SNIA, CDMI specification, and we had a lot of proprietary ones. it became very clear that the community, the ISV community, customers were adopting S3 a couple of years ago. That became the wave. So we decided to do a brand new one to really take advantage of the changes that the API moved on really quick. We wanted to be much more comprehensive. They also introduced in Amazon a whole multi-tenancy and identity management model called IAM, Identity and Access Management. So that's another big piece of what we're going to talk about here. And then just fitting into the enterprise, right? What does it mean to fit into the enterprise? Is it just about the APIs? No, it's about deployment and high availability and security. So really thinking about it more comprehensively than just an API. So that's really what this is all about. The core component of the S3 connector is an API server. That's the one that Giorgio talked about called the S3 server. It is the same code offered in the open source. So it's perfect for developers. You want to download it, maybe run it on a MacBook or on a small server. You can develop applications, test them. You don't have to pay for the cloud. But the beauty is once you have an application running locally, it's totally compatible with the full ring and very highly compatible with the Amazon True Cloud that Amazon Web Services offers. The way we deliver the software now is through a series of agile releases. So we've kind of gone away from that once a year, big bang, major release. What we'll talk about now is kind of a family of releases that come out about every quarter. So at the end of a release train, we do what we call a long-term support version, LTS. That means no new features go into that train. It becomes stable. It just becomes patched. But now we're going to talk about some things that are in our new release 7.0, which just went GA about a month ago. Okay, so that sets the stage. Last year, we started deploying this very seriously into some big production deployments. I'll talk about some of the customers that use it. But when the core feature set came out, we were very quickly told there's some key things we need to deploy this, right? The two categories that seemed to come up a lot were security and just operations. How do I manage it? How do I monitor it? So a lot of features were delivered as part of those agile incremental releases that I just mentioned. Things like, we started with the secure Amazon model of authentication, what they call signature v4. But can I do secure connections? Can I do TLS, HTTPS connections outside the system and within the system? Do we have encryption? One of the first customers we ran into was going to do medical imaging. Well, they clearly weren't going to store the medical images in the clear at rest. So a capability to do bucket encryption was very important. We started deploying this into financial institutions. And they said, well, this multi-tenancy model looks really great. I love the flexibility. But unless you can integrate with my Active Directory, this is a no-go, right? So making it single sign-on was another big thing for us. Operationally, people need to be able to tell what you're consuming, right? And one thing you find in the Amazon API is it's very, very comprehensive, but the API itself doesn't provide a utilization capability, the ability to say how much storage capacity, how much bandwidth is being consumed per bucket or per user. So we've done some work here to actually extend the API to provide a very rich utilization capability. But that's on top of monitoring, metering type of probes, health checks, and we'll kind of outline that as we go through. The last thing I want to say that we worked on very extensively because customers really wanted it is multi-site deployments. So it became paramount to support, first of all, metro area deployments. We had a lot of customers with 2 and 3 data centers in a certain geography, fairly low latencies between the sites. But what they wanted to do was basically protect themselves against one of the data centers going down and still have availability of the service. We've solved that problem. So in the current system, you can deploy across 2 or 3 data centers. If one of them goes down, you have availability. And the beauty is you're not replicating. So you have a single footprint of the data. You don't need to worry about keeping the 2 sites in sync. What we'll talk about next and what we'll demo is the extension to that to do wide area type replication. Okay, so a few notes on Amazon and the API. So I think we all know it's a fast-moving spec. We've attended the Amazon reInvent conference for the last few years. There's usually a bunch of announcements about new capabilities. Our intent with the new connector is to stay very, very current. We don't do every single one. I think you have to look at it kind of judiciously and say what is relevant, right? There are some things that are perfectly sensible for the cloud, but maybe not as relevant for on-premise. Our current measurements using the Ceph S3 test are that we are over 80% in terms of API coverage. What we see is that this open source component that we offer has become extremely useful for ISV testing. It's a way to give ISVs, our partners, a self-service validation test. They can, in a couple of hours, figure out, does it have all the APIs I need? In 98% of the cases, we found that the core APIs, multi-part upload, it's really sufficient for what they need. However, there are some more sophisticated features, right? Things like versioning, replication, lifecycle management. These are the things that we have delivered and are delivering now. Effectively, I think we look at it now as we're fairly complete. There are a few remaining ones, but it's sort of an on-demand basis, and we can respond very agilely. The other part of the connector, of course, is, as I said, the IAM model. So this is a service provided by our Vault component. So what we implement is IAM's multi-tenancy capabilities, multiple accounts, users, groups. They have policies for access control. We did the authentication mechanism since the beginning. The policies are very, very powerful. They're super granular. You can allow and deny lots of actions. So at this point, really, what are we missing? Well, we're REST compatible with Amazon. So if you want to use Amazon's own tool to manage our entities, you can do that. The main thing that we still have to deliver is what they call IAM roles, which we have nearly completed and will be delivered in the next few months. Okay, so both APIs are continuing to receive investment for us. These are some of the recent ISVs that we've been testing. This is kind of a rolling thunder. We keep going, but the categories of things that we've seen adopt S3 are lots of backup products, right? The ones you would think about, and even the ones I wouldn't have thought about, like Oracle RMAN. We see a lot of customers now want to do backups of Oracle and use the S3 protocol, so we have deployments for that. But all of the big vendors, video streamers, transcoders, collaboration tools, and lots of archivers. So we continue to kind of unfold this and really effectively use the S3 server for that. All right, so we wanted to kind of focus on the enterprise. There's a few key things I'll highlight here for enterprise deployments. The first one is, how do you do single sign-on or federated authentication of this new kind of cloud style of multi-tenancy and identity management with LDAP and Active Directory? Well, the secret is to use an identity provider solution that's SAML enabled. So this is something that's fairly common. You see this in a lot of web deployments. You can use a product like ADFS. There's a lot of other commercial solutions from CA and from Ping, many companies. Effectively, what it does is it sets up a three-way handshake between our Vault as a user tries to authenticate. That negotiates with the identity provider and Active Directory. It also provides a way to map domains on the Active Directory side to accounts on our IAM side, users to users, et cetera. Okay, so effectively this is done kind of through an assertion protocol that provides the credentials, and we auto-populate the users. All right, I mentioned encryption. So a customer came to us and said medical images, but the way we want to do this is as a service. So the key for them was to have a very transparent style of encryption. They wanted to basically have the ability to say, these buckets are encrypted, these are not. So what we've implemented is a way to say, this bucket is encrypted, all the puts, all the gets, then transparently encrypt and decrypt. We integrate with an external key management server because it's become very clear people don't want us to be the holder of the encryption keys. We are moving toward FIPS validation. As we start seeing a lot of government and federal type of accounts, that becomes very critical. We do start to see that also in the financial services as a requirement. So the process there is replacing the current open SSL library with a FIPS compatible crypto module. All right, I mentioned the utilization API. So this is in Amazon world, it's provided through their CloudWatch service. We've kind of now extended the API, so there's a REST API that lets you query buckets, users, accounts, and the whole deployment. Basically come back with a whole bunch of detailed metrics for billing and for chargeback. So things like, the obvious ones, capacity, but also a super granular list of all the S3 operations. We do see people want to do billing on things like data transfer in and out and number of operations. Okay, this will have a UI, and I'll show you some of the screenshots of the upcoming management interface for that. A lot of the customers, as they started going into deployment, did some very serious testing on failover, availability. One of the things we delivered as part of the Agile releases was the ability to do health checks on the service. So typically you have a load balancer, since we scale out, we can have a lot of endpoints in front of one of our object stores. They want to be able to do a way to kind of probe, is a certain endpoint alive? If it is, keep going, and if it's not, they want the ability to blacklist those and maybe retry them later. So that's one thing we started with. The other is that since we're a distributed system, they really wanted to be able to kind of probe the individual components. That's something that we now roll into our Cloud Monitor product. So for every one of our customers, they get access to our Cloud Monitor. The basic support customers get the sort of baseline KPIs, and then we have a higher level of dedicated support where they get a really detailed set of KPIs. Things like trending, alerts, all the underlying kind of health checks. All right, so to do this right, you also need to provide lots of insights into what's happening in the system in terms of logs and metrics. This is a screenshot of an upcoming user interface that we have. But all of these things that I talked about with S3 are now plugged in. Things like dashboards for looking at the logs. We are kind of making a movement toward API-driven management of the system at large. Everything from discovery and metrics to provisioning. So that makes it possible for even third-party tools to start plugging in. And we've started shipping dashboards based on Grafana. We also use Elasticsearch and Kibana. So as we hear popular tools, we can do plugins for those. Okay, so a couple of user stories. We've been dealing with a number of big financial institutions, both in the US and internationally. A lot of them have an initiative to set up a private cloud. They are embracing S3. We did hear, initial inclinations toward OpenStack a few years ago. It's become pretty common now that the storage interface they want is S3, largely because of the ISV solutions. So with this bank here, they had this initiative. The problem was really finding the lines of business that had a data storage problem that they wanted to send up to the cloud. What we're finding as a common theme is that enterprise backup is the one that they can really start with and feel really good about. So in the case of this one, backing up Oracle databases over RMAN was the first thing. The next thing was Microsoft SQL databases, both over S3, and they see more and more of these. Things like other types of backups over other solutions, compliant storage rolling forward.
Do you see the use cases for Scality being more used via ISVs, or do you see enterprises starting to rewrite some of their file storage or their native homegrown applications using the S3 API natively?
It's a strong mix. I think I'm surprised how often we go to customers internationally and they have teams of developers building S3. We recently ran into an insurance company that had hundreds of developers that are kind of embracing S3 as the protocol for their homegrown apps. But I would say that at least half the time, the initial use case is driven by something like a backup or an archive product. And the commercial solutions have really helped kind of make S3 the de facto.
What kind of things do you see enterprises storing in S3? Obviously, backup is easy. Medical imaging, and those sort of imaging kind of things, which one thinks of traditional things to store in an object store. What sort of other use cases are you seeing?
I think we see a lot of document repositories. We see now IoT as kind of a growing theme. So in fact, I had prepped a slide on that. This is a manufacturer that has an IoT cloud for many different types of data. So things like consumer devices, industrial sensors. That seems to be another big source of what we're seeing. But it can even be surveillance data. That's another thing that we're seeing quite a lot. Media, streaming media. We're seeing a lot of video on demand, IPTV type use cases as well. And a lot of the ISV applications in that space are now embracing S3. So things like Elemental and VizRT and unified streaming are kind of the leading vendors there.
So do you think enterprises are just wanting the flexibility that at the moment they may be storing things via NFS or storing it via SMB? Is doing it via S3 gives them the portability to store it on any cloud, and they can now do it on-prem with
well, I think that's
S3?
the portability has been an issue, and that's something that Zenko will address. But I think they like the fact that there's a critical mass of ISV apps that wasn't embracing the other object protocols. But I think it's the richness of the API, and then the need for an object model for scalability purposes, or the need for remote access over the cloud. Those are the drivers, right? I think we were just in need of something like NFS was in the NAS world, something that was a real standard that we could plug into across products. And I think it's become that. All right, a few more things. So I think as we enter the enterprise, doing things over command line, doing things over API is a great thing, but people still want to point and click, right? So the ability to manage accounts and users and groups and policies That's something we'll support now in an upcoming GUI. Really, the ability to just do simple management and things like provide new keys for users is a very, very common task, and changing access control policies. Okay, so some of the rich APIs that are now coming in S3 are the ability to do versioning. You can create buckets that are versioned or non-versioned. This means we never overwrite the data and you can restore. So through a certain version ID, you can always pull back older states of the data. This is also in the S3 world a baseline capability that's needed to do replication and lifecycle. Okay, so those are in fact the next two that I'll mention in a minute or two. The other thing we've now introduced is an ability to provide location control. So this is something that's useful, first of all, for just scaling capacity. Users always have a choice to scale up one object store, one ring instance, or they can grow across sort of fixed size increments with new ring instances. This capability, as you'll see, gets extended to do public cloud, to do integration with other cloud storage sources.
Could I use, pardon me, could I use that facility to do migrations between various things so that I can keep things alive and online, and as I essentially drain from one site onto another?
So we'll talk to you about data mobility, the ability to do things like lifecycle and replication to the cloud. I think there's a whole world of other things we can do for migration, but initially we're not addressing the migration use case per se.
Okay.
So we'll start with a demo actually of replication here in the next few minutes, okay? And even replication to cloud.
Okay.
All right, so in fact that's the next topic here, is that initially within the commercial object store, what customers were saying is I have data centers across the US or internationally, I need a DR solution, right? And it doesn't work to have a single kind of stretched metro area cluster in that environment. Amazon has an API that was introduced about 2 years ago. They call it CRR, cross-region replication. Basically, it's a per bucket capability. You say, this is my source bucket. You set up a target bucket. In our system, that target bucket can be in a ring, or it can also be in an Amazon cloud, okay? So the idea is that as you populate objects into the source, we asynchronously replicate them. You can fail over if there's a failure of the primary site. We will also work on a full resync so we can get a fail-back capability. And this is the heart of what Rahul will show us live here in the next few minutes. Okay, in fact.
Sorry, how consistent would that replication be? I mean, would somebody use that just for an archive, or would they use it for their live data and have that synchronously replicated somewhere else?
They will use it for live data, right? I think in many, many cases you have people that are continuing to write streams and they just need a secondary copy so that the local copy, the local data center isn't the single point of failure. So we do expect this to be live written data, right? In the case of CRR, you have to have versioned the source and the target bucket so that if changes are made on the target, it maintains its own independent version stream, right? So it's effectively unidirectional. You could set it up with sort of back and forth streams as well.
Are the writes then only acknowledged on the initial bucket if it's
right.
replicated to the second one?
It's a real async model. Local writes, returns control, and then it does the replication. And in fact, we'll get to some of the internals here with Rahul. He'll describe a little bit more about how this works. So, ready to go.